into one of the city's most heartbreaking mysteries. Rescue teams searched nearby woods, drainage systems, abandoned buildings, and miles of roadside throughout the following weeks. Police questioned witnesses, examined every piece of evidence recovered from the crash, and investigated countless tips from members of the public. Some believed the baby had been swept away by floodwaters. Others suspected that someone had arrived at the accident scene before emergency responders and secretly taken the child. Investigators pursued every possibility they could imagine. Search dogs combed the area repeatedly. Volunteers joined organized search parties despite freezing temperatures. Television stations interrupted their regular programming to broadcast photographs of the missing infant, hoping someone would recognize her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly became months. Yet despite one of the largest missing child investigations the city had seen at the time, there was no body, no confirmed sighting, no suspect, and no explanation that could answer the question haunting everyone involved. It was as though the little girl had simply disappeared into the storm. As the years passed, the investigation gradually lost momentum. Detectives retired. New cases demanded attention. Evidence grew older, and promising leads became impossible to verify. Eventually, the authorities reached the painful conclusion that there was little chance the child had survived the accident. Though no remains had ever been found, the case was quietly reclassified, and many people accepted that the missing baby had likely perished on that terrible night. Friends encouraged Evelyn to move forward with her life. Therapists urged her to find peace. Even family members, believing they were protecting her from endless heartbreak, gently suggested that holding on to hope was preventing her from healing. But Evelyn could never convince herself that her daughter was gone. Something deep inside refused to surrender. Every year on her daughter's birthday, she bought a small birthday cake. Every Christmas, she wrapped a single gift that remained unopened. Whenever she passed a young girl close to the age her daughter would have been, she found herself wondering what her own child might look like. Had she inherited Michael's smile? Did she still have the tiny birthmark she was born with? Was she alive somewhere, wondering about the family she had never known? Those questions never stopped following her. Years later, after building a successful business from nothing, Evelyn quietly invested part of her fortune into organizations that helped locate missing children and reunite separated families. To the public, those donations appeared to be acts of generosity inspired by compassion. Very few people knew they were also driven by an intensely personal mission. She read stories of reunions that happened after 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years apart. Every successful reunion reminded her that miracles, though incredibly rare, were not impossible. She refused to remove her daughter's photograph from her phone. She refused to stop carrying the duplicate silver locket she had kept all these years. Most importantly, she refused to let anyone convince her that a mother's instinct had no value. Somewhere inside her, a quiet voice continued whispering that her daughter was still alive. Returning to the restaurant, Evelyn carefully composed herself before walking back to the table. The young woman looked up nervously, immediately apologizing for touching the bread basket before everyone else had finished eating. Evelyn barely heard the words. Her attention remained fixed on the face across from her, searching for one final piece of the puzzle. There was only one question left that could either destroy the fragile hope growing inside her or confirm what her heart had been desperately trying to believe. She slowly sat down, folded her hands together to steady them, and looked directly into the young woman's eyes. "What is your birthday?" The young woman answered without hesitation, reciting the exact date she had always celebrated, the same date written on the documents prepared when she entered foster care. The moment the words left her lips, Evelyn's entire body went still. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. It was the date she had whispered to herself every single year for 19 years. The date she had engraved inside her heart. She lowered her head as quiet sobs escaped the composure she had maintained for so long. The young woman stared at her in complete confusion, unsure whether she had said something wrong. After a long silence, Evelyn reached trembling hands across the table, her voice barely strong enough to form the words that would change both of their lives forever. "I think I'm your mother." The young woman froze. The restaurant disappeared around her. Every sound faded into silence as the impossible words echoed through her mind. For several long seconds, the young woman simply stared across the table without speaking. Her mind struggled to process what she had just heard. The words sounded impossible, almost unreal, as though they belonged in someone else's story instead of her own. She slowly pulled her hands away from Evelyn's trembling grasp and shook her head. "No," she whispered, forcing a nervous smile that quickly disappeared. "That can't be true." She looked around the restaurant, hoping someone would explain what was happening, but every face she saw reflected the same confusion she felt. "I've spent my whole life wondering who my parents were," she continued, her voice growing unsteady. "People don't just find their family like this. Not in the middle of a restaurant. Not after 19 years. She swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm of emotions rising inside her. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." Evelyn didn't interrupt. She didn't plead with her. She didn't try to convince her with emotional words or desperate promises. She understood that hope, especially after years of disappointment, could feel more frightening than comforting. Instead, she quietly reached into her handbag and removed a worn leather envelope she had carried almost everywhere for nearly 2 decades. The edges had softened with age from being opened countless times. She placed it carefully on the table between them before slowly removing its contents one by one. First came an old family photograph. It showed a younger Evelyn standing beside her late husband while cradling a smiling infant wrapped in a white blanket. The young woman leaned forward without realizing it. The baby's tiny face looked impossibly familiar. Next came copies of hospital records from the day of the child's birth. Every document had been preserved with extraordinary care despite the passing years. Finally, Evelyn unfolded the delicate white blanket visible in the photograph. Though faded by time, a small embroidered pattern remained stitched into one corner alongside the initials, EC. The young woman stared silently as memories she never knew she possessed seemed to stir somewhere beyond her reach. Then Evelyn placed one final object onto the table. It was another silver locket. The restaurant fell silent once again. The 2 lockets looked almost identical, worn by different lives but crafted from the same design. Evelyn carefully opened hers, revealing a tiny photograph inside. Though faded with age, it showed the same smiling couple from the family picture. She gently motioned toward the young woman's necklace. "Would you mind opening yours?" she asked softly. With trembling fingers, the young woman unclasped the old locket she had worn since childhood. She had opened it countless times before, always believing it contained nothing except a folded piece of fabric. But as she carefully unfolded the tiny cloth under the brighter restaurant lights, something unexpected slipped onto the table. It was an old photograph, so faded that years of wear had almost erased the faces. She picked it up carefully. Even though time had damaged the image, there was enough remaining to recognize the same young couple standing together with a baby in their arms. The photograph matched the one lying in front of Evelyn almost perfectly. The young woman's breathing became uneven. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the picture back onto the table. "How?" she whispered. "How is this possible?" For the first time since their conversation had begun, doubt started giving way to something else. Not certainty. Not yet. But possibility. A possibility so overwhelming that it frightened them both. Around the restaurant, guests watched in complete silence, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Others exchanged stunned glances, unable to look away. Yet despite the growing mountain of evidence, one question remained unanswered. It was the same question that had haunted Evelyn for 19 years and now echoed inside the young woman's mind as well. If she truly was the missing child, how had she survived? Who had taken her from the accident? And why had she never been returned to the family searching for her? Evelyn slowly looked down at the hospital records before speaking again. There was one part of the investigation the police could never explain, she said quietly. No one knew what happened during the first few hours after the crash. The young woman listened without moving. Evelyn continued, recalling information she had uncovered only after years of hiring private investigators and reviewing forgotten files that had long disappeared from public attention. According to witness statements collected at the time, emergency crews